MTMM episode 9, and this week we have a special guest, the 2019 female 64 kilo national champion, our very own Katrina Smith.
Hi.
Okay, so I think today what we want to chat about, obviously yesterday was nationals. Pretty good day, some really good lifts, did what you had to do, all the rest of it. But I think what I want to touch on and chat with you today is more about the lead up. We talk a lot with our clients about having a holistic approach to our nutrition and trying to learn to take into account all the other moving parts that happen. Especially when you do try to dial in, it's often at that moment when you realize how chaotic your life is. And I guess the last few weeks haven't been what you might term the ideal lead up to a competition like nationals. So if we start, just over the last month, like when we sat down last month, what were the things that you were looking at in order to take into how you would approach nutrition long term for the month in the lead up to nationals?
Well, I think, first of all, really we kind of sat down 2.5 months ago and looked at things, because life doesn't exist in a vacuum, competition doesn't exist in a vacuum, and so when we knew I was going to nationals, we knew it was going to be 2 weeks after we got married. There was a lot of other stuff going on, and the prelim start list that came out quite early on showed having a significantly later weigh-in time, 4 o'clock p.m., which ended up being 4:30. So we knew early on that I was going to have to be quite light heading into this nationals. If I went into my wedding at 64 kilos, I was going to come out a little bit heavier, given that I was marrying into a family that loves to feed. So we kind of took a much more, I almost wouldn't call it a cut, I would almost call it more just like a very periodized weight loss approach. The goal was to kind of get me going into my wedding at 64 kilos so that I could come out of that at 65 and then have 2 weeks to get down to 63.5 for comp day, just so that I had a 500 gram wiggle room where I could eat the morning of. So basically my cut started 2.5 months out. I think that's really important when you're looking at kind of what you might want to do over the course of a year, what your competition calendar is considering that like everyone wants this perfect run of, I want my nutrition can be good for 3 months, or I can do this perfectly for X amount of time, but stuff always comes up, stuff always happens.
Yep. So
mapping it out in advance and coming up with a plan. I would say I've been competing at a 64 for 3 years now, and this was the easiest cut I've done.
And there's probably another element to touch on there, that we've been working with your nutrition and your cuts for 3.5, 4 years, right? So it's not like
in this weight class,
yeah,
longer in others. Yeah.
It's not that we're making a call 2 weeks out from a competition that you need to drop 4 or 5 kilos. And we really do sit down and kind of look forward for the year and be like, okay, these are the competitions we want to do, and this is how much lead up that we have into that. I think that's a really important point to coming into something like Christmas season, right? Where there's going to be, for most people, some excuse or some occasion coming up where they're going to overindulge, right? And it's going to seem like it's almost weekly or twice a week with Christmas parties and family functions and stuff like that. How important is, even not just for our elite athletes, but for just our health-focused individuals on mapping out and trying to almost choose, do you think, like those specific
100%.
occasions?
Yeah, I do that with every client that I work with, not athletes only, not only one subset of the population, absolutely everyone. It's look ahead at your calendar, look ahead at your work schedule and your social calendar, what events are coming up over. So do it every consult for the next 2 weeks. And then for a lot of people, we do map it out over the long term so that you can pick what's important, because people shouldn't miss out on what's important. I had a lot of people asking me yesterday at nationals, oh well, like you didn't get to have cake on your wedding day? Yeah, I did. I had wine on my wedding day, I had cake, I got to enjoy it because I'd really picked and chose those events leading into it that set me up to be there in a good place. I could imbibe and I could have a good time, but I was also still on track to make my goals.
Yeah, okay, good. Enjoying the moment, right? Being present, whether it's your first competition in the scale division in a team of 4, or whether it's on the national stage. Is that something you've had to work on to do? Trying not to get too caught up in everything that's going on and just taking a moment to understand that just getting on the platform or just being in your first competition is an achievement inside itself. Like having fun with competition, is that something that's taken the last 4 years to get to?
That took me years, yeah. And I think I do what I do because I love the journey, I love the training, and I enjoy that. If I was doing it just for the competition, and I have gone through periods where that has been my life, it's very miserable.
Yeah.
But it's also taken me a while to get comfortable, and every competition is different, depending on what the goal of a competition is or how you're feeling going into it. It's easier or more difficult to enjoy. Yesterday was a difficult one for me personally. I was saying I always do much better, and it's more natural to enjoy it when I have a fight, when I'm battling with someone.
Oh, you like to fight? Battling with someone that's not your husband.
Yeah, get it out. So about 24 hours out from this competition, the start list changed significantly, and it showed that I was kind of going to be on my own. And that is mentally a lot harder for me. For some people, it's easier. For me, it's, oh, don't screw this up. It just becomes so much pressure. But I think that particularly over the last 3 or 4 competitions, I've really learned how much fun it is when you have fun and when you enjoy the moment, and when it's just the pressure, just do well, just make people happy, like make people proud. It's an awful experience, and it leaves you not wanting to do it again.
Yeah.
So despite this being a tougher one mentally for me, I really tried to, hit your openers and get that out of the way, and then let the rest of it be for you and have fun.
So just in what you said, I guess I have 2 other questions from that. The first one is with what you mentioned with training. Right? Now, definitely having the wedding and having everything else that's been going on the last month, training's been sporadic at best, I guess. And I guess really when we look back at the first couple of Canadian nationals we did together, where there was building the schedule completely around training, and nothing got in the way of that. Whether you were sore, whether you were hurt, whether you were injured, it was a lot of tears on the platform and squatting with tears just rolling down your face and that sort of stuff. And I think that's something that I'd like you to talk a little bit about as well, because we often do see training become that be-all, end-all element. And I think what I've seen you be able to do over the last year in particular is train less, have more fun with it, and your numbers have exponentially increased.
Yeah. So I think there's probably not a coach in the world that is going to tell you, just do unstructured training, and especially when you're newer to a sport. I've been competing in weightlifting for about 7 years now, so it's definitely something that I have kind of amassed a repertoire of skill and capacity at. But you have to enjoy it, and training through injury and training through non-enjoyment, it does have to happen at some times. But if you don't have that element there, you really do start to demotivate and lose that, right? And I think that it's also really important to consider that competition is not necessarily reflective of your training. We would love it to be. It's you have this great training block leading into competition, everything goes perfectly. You might bomb out. It doesn't, or things just might not go your way on that particular day for reasons within your control or reasons completely outside of your control, what other people are doing. Likewise, you can have a training block like I did, which was non-existent. I kind of was just playing and doing what I wanted. Got sick, got injured, got married all in the 3 weeks before nationals this year, and still managed to come out on top. So it's a little bit luck of the draw, and so you need to put in your best effort, and you need to do the things that are going to set yourself up for success as much as possible, but then you have to lean into it and just let it go and enjoy it and do what you can do on the day with what you have.
Yeah. So I guess alluding into some of the upcoming stuff we have with the weightlifting platform, we've talked a lot about managing you to cut into this competition, but I'd love you to talk a little bit about how often we see novices or people that are deciding to do their first weightlifting comp and how hard it is sometimes to draw the emphasis away from wanting to cut weight.
Oh, yeah. So we have an article coming out called It's Weightlifting, Not Weight Making, which I think is really important, kind of at all stages, but definitely on the novice end of things. And that's simply, it is a weight class-based sport, and so yes, you do have to be focused on it, but people get into it and immediately they see qualifying totals that seem quite reasonable and quite achievable to them, and but it's only a weight class or two down. But those totals, as you start to drop weight, get infinitely harder. If you're trying to drop weight, depending on how you're doing it, your risk for injury exponentially increases. So my advice is always to gain capacity, to get strong, to get skill, and then worry about your weight class, right? I think it sets you up much better for not just like your short-term development, but your long-term health as an athlete as well. And I think it's really important to recognize that your weight class is not yours for life. So weight classes change all the time based on international standards. And likewise, when you come into a sport, especially women, I see a lot of women come into the sport and they come in, they have relatively low muscle mass, particularly weightlifting. They build a ton of muscle mass. You are going to gain weight. You might start out as a 59 and it's perfectly reasonable to be a 64 within a year or two, right? For some people that have some fat to lose for health-related reasons, aesthetic reasons, things like that, okay, reasonable, but let's tackle one thing at a time, right? It's okay to shift weight classes, and what you see so much of is people getting attached to, well, I was X weight class, so I have to stay X weight class, and moving up is a sign of failure, when actually it's the complete opposite. Like, staying in your weight class can actually be a sign of non-progress, right? Because your numbers get stagnant and you get frustrated and you get injured and you just don't enjoy training anymore. And it's like, I let my weight slide up 3 kilos when we moved to Australia, just to have some ability to live a little bit of life and engage in family events and stuff like that. Yeah, and I was getting fat. And my lifts went up like 15 kilos, and it was still an easy cut for me to get back to 64 after. So be a little bit playful with that and experiment and take an academic interest in your weight, right? But not such an emotional attachment to that number.
I think that's a particularly important message to drive home as we see more youth weightlifters coming up, especially because I think when you are 15, 16, and we saw, I think her name was Madison Power yesterday, and she's
amazing.
2003 or something on her birthday, maybe for incredibly old. But I think a message for athletes in that who already have so much potential and such huge expectation that builds with that too, that it's like whatever you do, your body's going to change over the next 5-10 years, right?
You've got like the best hormone profile you're ever going to have. Everything's working. You lay down muscle mass relatively easily compared to us that are a little bit older. So use that to your advantage.
Now, for those individuals looking to potentially go into their first comp, would you say there are any benchmarks that you like to advise of like, this is something you should be focusing on looking to do before you start to worry about what weight class you're in?
I wouldn't say there's like set black and white numbers that I look for. Things like body weight snatches, double body weight squats, stuff like that is like, okay, you're getting into like pretty serious territory and we can really start to play with things there. But I really think you need to take an individual look at each person, what their training background is, what sports they came from, what their body type looks like, their age, their injuries, all of that stuff before you can say, okay. I don't think it's reasonable to kind of hold someone back from playing around with weight classes just because they haven't achieved certain markers. But likewise, if you're, just working your way up from an empty barbell, focus on the technique, focus on building the strength and the support structures first.
Yeah, and I guess if it is your first comp, don't worry about the result either, right? And I think there's something to be said for, even yesterday, you missed that second snatch, and I've seen you miss a lot of snatches on the platform. It makes me very nervous.
My standard.
But I think that, we went through a phase where probably 6 months to a year was almost just like, I could look away and be like, yep, she's going to miss her first snatch 100%. And I think that part of being able to come back from that and miss a lift or 2 lifts and be able to still total has a lot to do with just how much competition experience you have. And I think that's one thing that gets missed, is it's not always about going in to win or needing to cut into a weight class to do well. That just being in the competition and doing the competition and getting used to it's a different experience when you walk out onto a platform to dead silence, all right? Especially for a lot of us CrossFitters, when we're used to 10 other people around us doing the same thing, cheering, tops flying off and everything else. When you all of a sudden walk into a dead silent theater and everyone's staring at you, I guess that takes just as much kind of learning and adapting to as the actual lifts themselves.
Yeah, and there's such a small percentage of the population that get to be on that platform. And I don't mean at a national level, I mean at any level.
Yeah.
Right? It took me until my first nationals, which was years into my weightlifting career, before I actually looked up. Before I looked up and looked at the crowd and like took in the moment a little bit. And that's probably when things started to change for me, I distinctly remember that being the funnest competition I'd ever had to that point.
Mm-hmm. Was that Montreal?
Yeah. And it really started to change and shift after that.
Yeah, and I think that is important, that whole being present, because, okay, great. At the moment we're reigning champion for 64 female, but especially with kind of what we've got planned and idea, there's no guarantee that we come back next year and do it again, right? Yeah. So, and that can be, whether that's a decision that we make or whether that's, something that's forced upon us or whatever else. So I think being present and trying to take a look around and look up into the crowd and just enjoy that moment is definitely a big part of it. And the last thing I want to touch on, you've been a nutrition coach for 4 years. You're currently doing your Masters of Nutrition and Human Performance. How much of a difference does it make, even for someone with your experience, to actually, and this is not a toot my own horn, but to actually have the ability to offload that nutrition and that stress and that idea? I know that's a big thing we promote within the business, is having all of our coaches working with another coach. But I still see a lot of people thinking, I'm an athlete, or I'm a CrossFitter, I've been doing this for so long, I'm a weightlifter, I should be able to manage my own nutrition. And I think that's something that that's not even something that we would do.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would never say, oh no, you can't do that. Of course you can. I just, for me personally, and in my experience over 4 years with like a multitude of individuals and athletes, it is just, if we can reduce your stress by 70%, which, let's be honest, leading into a competition, usually the bulk of the stress is about weight management for most people. If we can take that off of you, it's massive. It's the same thing as, my very first weightlifting competition ever. Myself and my training partner self-coached each other and were submitting numbers in the back, and it was just like my heart rate was through the roof for the full 2 hours.
Grace at the back.
Yeah, it was so stressful. And it's the same thing with having a weightlifting coach. I've never been more relaxed in the back as I have been the last few comps, and just say, submit whatever you want. Like, you guys know me, you know what to do. It's the same thing with your nutrition. Like, when you have a plan and you can just do it and you can focus on the things you can control, and that focusing on the things that you can't control is taken away from you and handled by someone else, that's everything.
Yeah, and I guess it gives you that opportunity as well to be able to actually focus on making lifts, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not uncommon that we see people outside the weight room in hoodies doing burpees and then reloading with Maccas, right?
Yeah.
And if you're gonna have to bonk it to get into your weight class and then cramp, not be able to have no energy, want to fall asleep on the platform and not have a good performance, and it's like, what's the point?
I think probably one of the things that bothers me the most, just kind of being at weigh-in and stuff with my competitors, is when I'm chatting with someone and they're telling me what a hard cut they've had, and then I see them weigh in like a kilo underweight.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh my God, you overcut so much. Like, why? And then they go and they have this not phenomenal performance, or they bomb out or something like that, and it's like, that could have been avoided,
And that also makes that mental state much harder as well when you are already fatigued and tired and everything else. Congratulations, Bubsy.
Thank you.
First Australian Nationals. Couldn't have gone any better. So,
well, I could have made that second snatch, but
could have gone 6 of 6. They would have been disappointed you didn't go for more, no doubt.
Exactly.
But yeah, I'm excited for the next couple of months, and hopefully now, on the backside of a long cut like that, like some time off to really just not have to think about it.
Absolutely.
Now, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mags.